Australia is gearing up for elections, and one of the major emerging issues is the treatment of women in politics. These protesters are here demanding an end to what they say is a culture of misogyny in their parliament. Why are you here today?
I'm here for myself, my sister, my friends, and my future children.
Australia has long struggled with its treatment of women. Government figures show 1 in 3 have experienced physical violence. 1 in 5 women here are sexually assaulted.
We're frustrated as hell. Yeah. It's infuriating.
What makes you so angry?
There's progress in the sense that we're talking about it, but we've been talking about it for centuries.
And are we being listened to?
That's the other thing, yeah.
There is nothing left to say. We have said it all. What we demand now is action.
What does it mean for an election year that Australian women are pretty pissed off?
Well, it means that they need to put women at the forefront of this election. They need to stop talking and start coming up with some real action.
Last year, this frustration reached fever pitch. Tens of thousands of women across Australia hit the streets after a young political staffer said she'd been sexually assaulted inside what should have been the safest building in the country.
I was raped inside Parliament House by a colleague, and for so long it felt like the people around me only cared because of where it happened and what it might mean for them. My story was on the front page for the sole reason that it is a painful reminder to women that if it can happen in Parliament House, it can truly happen anywhere.
The Prime Minister's response was at best tone deaf. He called the protests a triumph of democracy.
Not far from here, such marches, even now, are being met with bullets. But not here in this country, Mr. Speaker. Not here in this country.
Morrison's government did launch an investigation into parliamentary culture, but the report by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner was damning. After surveying more than 1,700 people inside Parliament House, the review found that 1 in 3 had experienced some form of sexual harassment in their workplace. None of this surprised Chelsea Potter, who worked for the governing Liberal Party for years.
Chelsea, how long have you been involved in politics?
So I joined the Liberal Party when I was 16 years old. Half my life now, I'm 33.
Wow.
I've been in that time a political staffer, I've been a volunteer, I've been a campaign worker, I've been a campaign manager.
Why did you want to get into politics? That's a weird thing for a 16-year-old to be excited about.
Did not make me the coolest kid in school by any stretch, but I watched Question Time and I just loved the strategy and the theatrics and the conversations that were being had.
Was there a particular way young women or women in general were treated differently, you think?
I do think there was a stark difference between the way that young women were particularly treated. Comments would be made about me, about how I looked or what I was wearing, about my relationships. That became an increasing feature. I didn't realise how unsafe it was until this particular colleague pinned me down and removed my underwear one night, completely out of the blue. Something I had never foreseen happening. This guy was a friend of mine. The next day I went into work like nothing happened.
Did you make a complaint about this?
The last thing I wanted to do was draw any attention to it. There was no individual, private, confidential avenue for me to make a complaint. I'd have to go through my office. So I just hushed up because I thought at the end of the day, I don't want to lose my career. I'd been working towards this since I was 16 years old.
Did you tell your boss what happened?
Eventually, but not until I decided to speak out in 2019. I reached out via text message on a Friday and I got what I interpreted as a very cold message. Basically, I should call 1-800-RESPECT if I've got any.
That's a helpline for women.
Yeah, seek professional assistance is what he said.
Harassment isn't just a problem for staffers like Potter. The country's first female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, faced shocking abuse, and she wasn't alone.
misogyny, sexism, every day from this Leader of the Opposition. I was offended when the Leader of the Opposition went outside in the front of Parliament and stood next to a sign that said, "Ditch the witch." I was offended when the Leader of the Opposition stood next to a sign that described me as a man's bitch.
When you were in politics, a group of male politicians who called themselves the Swinging Dicks sought to block your career aspirations.
Well, actually, I believe it was Big Swinging Dicks.
And I will name you because you are not fit to be in this chamber, you're not fit to represent your constituents, and you're not fit to call yourselves men.
One way to improve the treatment of women in politics is to elect more women. But Australia is pretty bad at that. When it comes to gender diversity in Parliament, the country has plummeted over the last 2 decades, from 19th in the world to 57th. Only 38% of elected representatives in this Parliament are women. Alicia Payne is one of them, and she's running again in these elections.
How do people react? I mean, not just in Parliament, but even out in the community, you know, seeing a young woman who is standing for elections.
There are certainly some reactions that I feel I wouldn't get if I was a male politician. Certainly often a lot of the mansplaining. I don't know if that's a term in America.
It's very much a term in America.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, we get a lot of that. You get a lot of unsolicited advice from people that I don't think I'd get if I was male. A lot of questioning of your experience, whether you should be here, whether, what have you done to be able to hold this position, that sort of thing.
How are you going to convince more women to get into Parliament when there are these horrific stories about the kind of treatment they're in for?
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of be the change you want to see. When young women talk to me about whether they should look at getting into politics, I'm always very encouraging of that.
Do you warn them as well, though, a little bit?
There are sorts of issues, obviously, that women face that male politicians don't, and we do talk about those things, but ultimately, I think the more women we have, the better it will be for everyone.
Senator Sarah Hanson-Young was elected into Parliament when she was just 25, making her the youngest woman to win a seat. She says the harassment began almost immediately.
Can you give me examples that you've been on the receiving end of some of this?
I've had men come up to me and whisper things in my ears as they've walked past for a vote. I've had men yell out the names of other men that they think I'm sleeping with or want other people to think I'm sleeping with. But my confidence had really been shaken because every time I would go in, I would have this barrage of just really sexualised bullying and harassment. And then when a colleague, in the middle of a debate about women's safety actually, yelled out in front of all of our colleagues that I should stop, quote, shagging men, that's when I thought, oh, I have to put a stop to this. And that's when I took him to court.
And you won.
And I won. It was a long, hard fight. As I said, it ended up in the High Court, but I did win. I didn't want to let a man who used such a lazy tactic of sexism and sexualised bullying and slurs and slut-shaming get away with it just because he couldn't put in the effort to debate me on policy.
Is this issue, women's rights, kind of important in this election?
It is important in this election. It is so important. And the Prime Minister himself knows that he and his government have a women's problem. But fundamentally, we need to get more women elected because it changes the conversation. It changes the priorities of the issues that's debated and it changes the culture. And it's the culture that really needs the shake-up. The women of Australia are not ready to move on. We want this fixed.